you doing? Hope you're well. Doing good to see you. It's fine. Never really done a just chatting stream. I don't know. We're gonna have music playing throughout most of it. I'm just gonna let it go. But I'm gonna rank some Final Fantasy stuff because I have not done this yet, and I said I would. Probably won't take any breaks. Probably only be like 2.5 hours at most. But I have some things that I want to do. I want to rank. Played all of them. Figured I'll do the dumb thing that the internet does. Rank my shit. I'll rank them on a number of things. We're gonna do power rankings, which will just rank everything I played. I'll even throw in like 13.2, which I've played through last year. I'll do Lightning Returns, which I only played for like 2.5 to 3 hours. I got enough out of that game to really know what I was looking for. I'll put the 7 remake on there as well, just because it is another game that I have played. And yeah. So yeah, let's have some fun with this. All right, so first up, I'm gonna rank the games. I'm just gonna rank all the games that I've played. There's a bunch of stuff on here that is not games that I played. Like we've got Bravely Default 2, Bravely Default. I could rank those, but Bahamut Lagoon doesn't matter. I don't even know what this is. Bravely Second, never played it. None of those matter. And at the bottom here, Parasite Eve is S tier. I don't even need to put that on the list because Parasite Eve, but it's not a Final Fantasy game, so it's not getting ranked. This list is just related games to Final Fantasy. I actually had to put Stranger Paradise on here so that I could rank it. I'll be honest, there might not be anything in the F tier. There might not be anything in the D tier. No, we'll get to that. All right. So I'm going to rank in order from how I played them, or at least in chronological order from like timeline perspective of where these games take place. So first up is Stranger Paradise. I really like this game. I think Stranger Paradise is really good, and I think that more people should play it if they haven't. It's a solid Souls-like experience, but it's more akin to Nioh, seeing it's made by the same people. So it's level-based as opposed to being a concurrent world that's interconnected. Combat, it starts off being a little tough, but it gets less difficult the further in you get, mostly because you have magic, and magic allows you to do a lot of cool stuff. So, for that, I'm gonna put it in A. It's an A tier game. I think Stranger Paradise it has a stupid story where you're hunting down chaos, but it's everything that it should. It's exactly what it presents itself as kind of ludicrous, and as you get through the game towards the end, like, it starts making more sense. It's an interesting kind of like setup for what Final Fantasy 1 is. So we'll get to that one next. Final Fantasy 1. Oh boy. So there's like 3 different ways you can play this game. You play the NES version. You could play the PlayStation remake. I guess you could play the Game Boy Advance version, so there's 4 ways. And then you could play the Pixel remaster. And honestly, if you were to play any of those, I would say of the 4 different ways to play it, don't play the NES version. Play any of the other versions. I've played the PlayStation version, and I've played the Pixel remaster. The PlayStation version was fine, but it suffers from issues with the game overall because the game's not very good. We'll be honest, like Final Fantasy 1 is lacking in a lot of departments. But for the sake of this, it's all Pixel remastered stuff. I think Pixel Remaster does a good job of presenting Final Fantasy 1 as Final Fantasy 1 is. It's bare bones. There's like no story there. It's really just you're the 4 heroes of light. You go in as your 4 predetermined classes, and you move on, and kind of like go through the story that way. It doesn't really do a good job of directing where characters or where you're supposed to go. Players kind of have to try and guess. It does a good enough job, and newer translations have made that easier to do. But overall, I think it's a C tier game. And a lot of that is just because of its age, lack of story, and it's just things are broken. If you play the NES version, things are broke in that game. But overall, it's a fine way to start the franchise. It doesn't suck. It just isn't good. Which brings us to Final Fantasy II, a game I expected to kind of come away from with negative feelings, but I really like Final Fantasy II. It's the first one to introduce a story. It has, you have Guy, is it Guy? Why can't I remember any of the other characters' names? Firion and lady friend. I don't remember her name. Well, it's been a year. But they're on a quest, and then there's a rotating fourth member of the team that kind of comes in and out. It has the most interesting leveling system out of all of the games. It is... It's... I don't know, 2's good. If you can get past its quirks, 2 has a lot going for it in terms of just like... It builds out how you want to play it. It's the most... I would argue that it has one of the most Western leveling systems of any of the Final Fantasy games. And by that, I mean, like, you compare it to something like Elder Scrolls, which, you know, you want to increase your jumping, or you want to increase your, like, blacksmithing, or any of these other abilities in those games, you just do the ability over and over. 2's similar to that. It does a lot of that. And for that, I put 2 and B. 3 is the first one to introduce job systems. It has... I don't know, 3's weird, because, like, it's not a bad game by any means, but I didn't really think it's, like, all that good either. It doesn't take what 2 did and kind of expand on it. It has a story. There is a story there. But it's more about your characters and utilizing the job system to get through specific instances, which I think is cool. I like that they do... unlike Final Fantasy V, which we'll get to, the job system in 3 is very much, you know, to meet the needs of the situation. So you go a ways into how you want your characters to be, but also some situations require you to be a specific type of job in order to progress. And I think it does a good enough job at what it's supposed to do. It looks good. The Onion Knights are fine. I really like the way that the world is, where it starts off and it's like an island of sorts, and then you go and you see the overworld, and the overworld's just ocean, and then you go and you do like a dungeon, and boom, you have a whole nother world to kind of explore. I think that's really cool. It's an interesting way of opening up the games, and it's a nice, like, it kind of, what they do, and it kind of like, they repeat in 4 and in 5 and in 6 to a degree, where it's like you start out one way, and then the world becomes something different, and then it becomes something even greater. But it's only 2 layers as opposed to like 3 to 4, which you'll get with future iterations. And for that, I'm going to put that B tier as well. I think 3 is a good game. I don't think I like 2 more than 3. Personal list. It is what it is. Final Fantasy IV is really where I think Square kind of hit their stride with storytelling, and where they, like, all the things that they tried in 2 and then eventually 3 come to fruition in 4 in a way that I think is really interesting. 4 is one of the only, I think it's the only one, let me think here, the only one that lets you have 5 characters in your party, which is pretty fantastic. And each of them have their own specific role, but there's no real, like, delineation over a lot of the things. It is still a very good game. And I think 4 is like the true beginning of what makes Final Fantasy great. I, however, do not have the nostalgia for it that a lot of others may. So I kind of hold it in a lower regard than I do of some of the other ones. It is, I think, an A-tier game for sure. I like the way that it does its story. I like the way that it kind of puts forth how things happen. I like that characters leave and come back. Characters die, but do they? And it's an interesting way. You don't really see that in a lot of games from that era where like your main cast is constantly shuffled because either they're dead or they have to go away because they've been stolen. And then on top of that, you've got Kane, who like, God, how many times does he betray you? Like 4? Like Kane, but he ends up being like one of the better characters in the game. Plus, I realized this the other day when watching something else. He's the only left-handed character in the game, and it shows because when you equip, he always has his weapon in his left hand. But he's a Dragoon, so, you know, it is what it is. And he's a good character, but man, he's kind of a bastard. But I'll put it in A. I enjoyed my time with Stranger of Paradise more than I enjoyed playing through Final Fantasy IV for the 3rd time. So I'm going to keep those right there. No, I'm going to put 4 ahead of Stranger of Paradise. I do think I really like Stranger of Paradise, but 4 is... It's more formative to what Final Fantasy is, where Stranger of Paradise is just kind of like a good one in the franchise. After Years, didn't play, don't care. Oh, here, let's do this. Didn't play, doesn't matter. That's After Years. Didn't play it, don't matter. In fact, I can put this here. Oh, actually, no, we'll add... add row below. We're gonna make it Hank. Nope. That one can stay whatever color it was. What was it? Yellow? No, it wasn't yellow. This. Not a Final Fantasy. Change that color to pink. Bravely Default 2, Bahamut Lagoon, whatever the hell that is, Bravely Second, Saga Games, Parasite Eve, and Vagrant Story. You might be going, Sam, why aren't you putting Xenogears there? We'll get to that. Okay, so it's 4. On a 5, where'd 5 go? 5's here. I love 5. I didn't play 5 until... I think the first time I played 5 was like 2020, 2021, something like that. Fell in love with it. I'd watched many people do the 4-job Fiesta, which is a very fun way to play Final Fantasy 5. And I almost wanted to do it for this particular playthrough, but still don't understand how the rules work with it, so I just didn't. But Final Fantasy 5, I think, is great. The story is bonkers and stupid, and Exdeath is a villain that exists but is a driving force, but really like the reason to play 5 is to experiment. The job system in 5 is so well fleshed out that I think the only game that can kind of come close to getting anywhere near what it does is Tactics. I have played a little bit of... Oh, here, let me move Tactics Advance and Tactics Advance 2 over there. Because I didn't play, they don't matter. I'll leave Tactics down here. I have played a little bit of it. I can rank it. I can put it somewhere because I like what it does. But we'll get to that when we get to that. But with 5, like, other than Tactics, the only game that really lets you kind of like experiment with character builds and classes and all that kind of stuff would be... Actually, no, 6, 7, and 8 kind of allow you to do a lot of that too. So 5's really the start of that particular style of Final Fantasy that I think really lends itself to lots of experimentation. Has a good soundtrack, has like 4 different worlds that you can go through. Grinding feels good to do because you're doing it for reasons that are in terms of the character growth. So like, I don't know, 5 is really good. I put 5 above 4 personally. It is an A tier game. Actually, no, 5 is S tier for me. Like, I really like 5, and I'd put it all the way up here just because I like what it does with how it tries to do experimentations. Final Fantasy 6 is my favorite in the franchise by a long shot. There is nostalgia goggles there. I understand that. But I think everything about the game is close to perfect. And I think there's only a handful of things that I think are better than what Final Fantasy VI does in terms of like everything to do with characters. Like, I think character progression is good. I really like the Magicite. I love, like, Kefka's a great villain, but the overarching story is really interesting, somber and sad. I mean, Final Fantasies as a whole, like, you look at all the Final Fantasies outside of like 1, they're all, and maybe 3, they're all kind of sad, melancholy games that you're trying to overcome a bunch of stuff and you got to kill a god. You do that in all of the games. Like, you kill a god in all of the games. But like 6 really gets to heart of it. There's a huge cast of characters that all have their own unique way to play, and you can flesh that out even more using the Magicite. It's just, I don't know, 6 is a wonderful game, and it's as close to perfect as you can get in a video game in my thought process. Cue the Overworld Theme. It's good. Like, Final Fantasy VI is fantastic, and if you have an interest in playing Final Fantasy as a franchise and as a series, and you don't know where to start, honestly, any game is fine. But if you are interested in the best they have to do with the turn-based style of combat, I think 6 is the one to go to. Many people will argue for 7. Many people will argue for 10. I'll get to those in a moment. But I think 6 is like the right place to start. Starting from 1, you're just gonna end up being disappointed. But 6 is a great place to start. It is the culmination of everything leading up to it. And 6 is really the turning point for the franchise, in my opinion, because after 6, you start to see them experiment a lot more with the formula that they had going. And 6 is kind of the culmination of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as a whole in its own regard. 6 doesn't have the job system that 5 has, but 6 allows you to craft character classes depending on how you build them out with the Magicite. It's a wonderful game. Great soundtrack, great story, great villain, great everything. Play Final Fantasy VI, please. Okay, on to 7. I'm gonna take a drink. Okay, on to 7. 7 is a game that I have a sordid past with. I remember when 7 came out in 97. 99? 97. 97. 97. I remember when it came out. I remember being flummoxed by why it wasn't on the N64 when the Final Fantasy franchise had been leading, or had been only on the Nintendo consoles. But I was 13 when it came out, so none of that mattered. But getting a PlayStation was a pain in the ass because I was 13, and it's not like I could just be like, I need a PlayStation. You know, I didn't come from a rich family. Just got to deal with that shit. But with 7, I liked it when it came out. The part with Aeris in the Village of the Ancients, you know what part I'm talking about. The part that everybody knows. Even if you've never played Final Fantasy VII, you know that scene. The first time you see it is jaw-dropping. Especially in 97. You didn't see shit like that. Like, if you'd played Final Fantasy IV or Final Fantasy II as it was known in the States at the time, you would have been maybe accustomed to main characters dying and being removed from the party. But almost all of those came back at some point. And, like, none of them truly died. Like, Yang, you find him in the underworld. Polymaporum, they come back. Like, they managed to get themselves out of their stone mechanics. Tella does die, but he doesn't die until, like, the very end. And Kain, while he betrays you several times, he's still kind of a good guy. Kind of. It's a bit iffy. And yeah, like, that's... But when it happens to Aeris, because of all that, you're just like, oh, she'll be back. She's fine. No, she gone. She gone, and she gone for the rest of the game. And while I don't really think she's a great character in the original game, like she's fine, it's still a wow kind of situation. That being said, I think 7's story is overblown. I think people like it because it's their first Final Fantasy, which is completely fine. I understand that. You like what you like. But I think the story's a little overblown. I don't think it's as cool as it could be. Cloud as a character is kind of a nothing burger of a character. He's like zero personality. And everybody thinks he's so damn cool. And he's got a giant sword. And he's got spiky hair. You know who else has a giant sword but is like significantly cooler and much more of a fleshed out character? Guts. Read Berserk. Very good. And I mean, that's what he's kind of riffing on. And I don't know. It is what it is. And I'll get into the other Final Fantasy VII games after I rank this one. But like, I understand why it is the fulcrum of what Square does with Final Fantasy going forward, simply because it was the one that sold it. It came out at a time when people were starting to get into video games. They were starting to break free of their niche kind of aspect in the overall zeitgeist of pop culture. Like, video games were still like a niche thing, and people were just kind of like, ooh, video games. But they were growing, and they were becoming more because they were becoming more popular, and the people that were playing them as in their youth, like the NES and SNES, were growing up. And they had the ability to be adults that play games, and that was something that kind of helped it grow. It didn't really get to that point until PS2, but the PlayStation was like the start of it all. And it sold a ton. Sure, go ahead. And it sold a ton, but like, that's part of why it kind of is what it is. And I had so many negative feelings towards 7 because it was just like, yeah, it's fine. It's a video game. But to get back to ranking 7. So all of that being said, like my negative feelings towards 7 going into this project and never having finished 7, having played it but never finished it, seen the end a handful of times. There's a lot of really interesting stuff happening in 7 that I completely just ignored because of my distaste for it. 7 has the most mini games out of like any of the games that I played from this franchise. It's almost everything you do ends up being a mini game. It has one of the most unique looks. The chibi overworld aspects, or the chibi overworld characters versus the pretty stylized, really awesome looking battle character models. There's some interesting stuff going on there, just in terms of pure visuals. Limit breaks are interesting, and it's the first time that they're actually like manageable. 6 had the near death moves, which if you've played 6 a number of times, you'll maybe have seen 1 or 2 of them, but there's really no way to like get them to happen. You just kind of got to get lucky that your character will trigger it. But they kind of took that and said, let's make it an actual gauge that builds up and something you can use in 7. The only really downside to 7 is once you have it, you have to use it because you can't do anything else really. You have to do your limit break, which is fine because I mean, I played on the remastered version, so I had like the ability to give myself limit break anytime. So it's kind of cheating, but it is what it is. Also, playing the remastered version of 7 and 8 are like the best ways to play that game, to be honest. Like, they're great games in their own regard, but hot damn. But yeah, so 7 has the materia system, which is interesting and allows you to really customize your characters and kind of build them out how you want. Personally, I prefer the Esper system and the Magicite system from 6. I think it works better and doesn't take as much work to really kind of flesh it out. With 7, it's like a way to pad the game length because it's not a very long game. It's like 30 hours, maybe. And having all that kind of stuff in there kind of pads out the length if you want to kind of maximize those. It isn't the first game to have super bosses, but it's the first one to have cool super bosses. Like Omega in 5 5 looks like just any, it's just essentially a reskin or a restat of another character that you fight, but that's the first introduction of super bosses in the franchise. 6 doesn't really have a super boss. Oh, it's got the dragon. It's kind of whack. Like, the dragons are fine, but it's kind of a weak thing. But the Emerald and Ruby weapons are really cool. They're like sweet mechas. And makes me wish that they'd have more mecha in Final Fantasy, but they have other games for that. And yeah, like, overall the story kind of sucks. I think it's really dumb and and just lacking in a lot of like oomph that you get. Sephiroth is a cool villain, but he's also kind of not really. Genova's a cooler villain, but they don't really do anything with it. They kind of shift focus between the two of them in weird ways. Cloud kind of sucks. The rest of the cast is like, I love Sid. Barrett's cool. Tifa's cool. Cat is way more integral to the story than I had expected him to be, but, you know, kind of dumb. Like, just, I don't like the design very much. Yuffie is Yuffie. Am I missing it? Oh, and Vincent's cool as shit. So, like, there's a lot of cool stuff going on here. But I will put FF7 in the A tiers, and I had more fun with 4 and with Stranger of Paradise than I did with 7. But I think 7 is a fantastic game, and I just don't hold it in as high a regard as I do some of these other ones. Which then leads me to the ancillary 7 games. First, let's see what this is from Mr. Dragoon Seal.
Squall is a Virgo? Really? That's fucked up. It's weird. You would think it would be a Leo.
Hold on, I missed that.
Squall is a Virgo? Really? That's fucked up. It's weird. You would think it would be a Leo.
You would think he would be Leo.
Well, no. Now that I think about it, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, okay. That's good. That's good. Like that. Oh no, wrong one. Okay, it was about Squall? Well, either way, they both kind of suck as protagonists. We'll get there. So yeah, okay, so 7, so more in Final Fantasy 7. I managed to play like everything from the Final Fantasy 7 family of games. There are 3 games. I think there's more, but there's 3 games that matter. Remake doesn't count, and I will rank that, but it doesn't count because it's Final Fantasy 7 too, in a weird way. I won't spoil any of it, but it is. It's not the same game. It is literally remaking 7. It's a different game with the same characters. 7's good. 7 is an A rank game without a doubt. Or 7 Remake is an A rank game without a doubt. I'm not gonna like actually place it in like a particular order. It's just a very good game. Play it if you have a chance. You won't be dissatisfied. You'll get 30 to 40 hours out of it. It'll be fine. Anyway, so Crisis Core, the prequel to Final Fantasy VII, introduces you to Zack Fair, who's mentioned briefly by Aeris in Final Fantasy VII itself. And like, all you know is that Squall knew it. It's a nice, like, fun way of kind of like fleshing out some of the characters a little more. I really like Aeris in Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, which is why I like her as much as I do in the remake, because the remake does a great job of taking that characterization of Aeris, the really kind of fun, spunky, no nonsense, femme fatale. She's not even a femme fatale, just the no nonsense character that she is in Crisis Core, and kind of transplants her into the Final Fantasy VII games proper. And while she is kind of a smartass in the mainline Final Fantasy VII game, remake does a better job of characterizing. But it starts in Crisis Core. You get that kind of personality from her in this. Crisis Core is interesting because it came out 10 years after the release of Final Fantasy VII and kind of fleshes out more of what's going on there. It was a PSP game. I played the Reunion version, which was made available for PlayStation 4 or 5 PC. I think even Xbox. I don't know. We can forget Xbox. It's an interesting game. It's nice and short. It's built for mobile. You can tell it's built, well, not even mobile, but it's built for like a handheld. You can tell because of the structure of the game. It tells an interesting story. It actually makes me care a little bit more about like Cloud and Tifa. And honestly, I hate the fact that like, even in playing Final Fantasy VII, and this has nothing to do with Crisis Core, this is just me going on a little bit of a rant. Even in playing Final Fantasy VII, the romantic interest between Cloud and Aerith isn't quite there. Like it's barely there. The romantic interest between Tifa and Cloud, much more, because they're childhood friends. She actually knows who he is, even if he doesn't quite remember who he is. Even if he ends up not being quite who he thinks he is, which is what Crisis Core kind of leads to. The romantic interest between Aerith and Cloud is just, it's kind of nothing. They like end up, like there's a little bit, but it's more like they're like siblings in a way. Whereas Tifa genuinely has feelings for Cloud. And I kind of hate that it seems like Remake and Rebirth are going to be pushing more into the Cloud and Aerith like relationship stuff when I don't feel that's there. Like truly, I don't see it. I don't see it. Also, Tifa's like a way hotter character. I mean, this is me pulling up my man shit here and just being like, Tifa's way cooler. She's got a better design. You know what I mean? I also think she's a better character. She's a punch girl. Big fan of punch girls in games. They're pretty rad. I think she has an interesting personality. It's a little flat in the original game, but I think they do a better job of it in the remake. And even in Crisis Core, which Remake feels like it's like a more of a sequel to Crisis Core than it is actually just a retelling of 7. Anyway, to get to the point of ranking this game here, it's fine. Is it worth playing? I don't know. It's better than Final Fantasy 1. And it had it's gonna be B tier. But I'm gonna put it after 2. Yeah. It's a much more functional game than 1 and 3, and even 2 to that regard. I think 2 does a lot more interesting things than what Crisis Core does for the franchise, so I'm gonna throw that there. Dirge of Cerberus was not a good game. It didn't even have a good story. Played kind of like shit and was short. That's like the best part about it. But it is more Vincent, and I do love Vincent. And it is a bit more Turks, and they're interesting characters too. I can't honestly recommend it, and I actually enjoyed my time with 1 more than I enjoyed my time with Dirge of Cerberus. Don't play Dirge of Cerberus. It's a waste of your time. All right, on to 8. I love Final Fantasy 8. I'm not afraid to say it. I don't think it's S tier. I think it's A tier, and I enjoy my time with 8 more than I enjoyed my time with 4. It does a lot of stuff not great, but it does a lot of stuff that it has no right to do and manages to make it all interesting. 8 is one of the most interesting games in the franchise because of how many different choices. 8 is very similar to 2 in my eyes, because 2 tried to change the formula. I mean, 2 also came out at a time when a lot of companies were trying to make the second game like something different and more. Look at Zelda 2. It's a completely different game than what Zelda 1 is, but also not quite. It's like there's difference there, but there's still the same foundation. Castlevania 2. Castlevania 2, you could say, is the predecessor to the Metroidvania style of Castlevania games post Castlevania 4, or even Rondo of Blood. It did a lot of the things that you get from a Metroidvania. None of them very good, but it tried. And like companies in late 80s were really trying to challenge themselves with the sequel. And eventually, I mean, they went back to the way things were. 3 is very much more like 1 than it was like 2. And Zelda 3, aka Link to the Past, is much more like Zelda 1 than it was like 2, but it also takes the story structure of 2 and puts it more into that way. Castlevania 3 is much more like 1, so on and so forth. Final Fantasy VIII is like 2, where you look at it in comparison to the 2 that are around. 7 is like taking 6, putting it into 3D, and adding more. Just more overall. 9, which I'll talk about more in a second, is much more of a return to that style with 7, while giving it like a nice fresh coat of paint. 8 tries some. Whether or not it succeeds is a completely different situation. The junction system, I think, is really cool. It's a really unique way of kind of building out characters and like getting you to play the game. The junction system's neat, and once you figure it out, you can abuse the hell out of it. I mean, I beat that game at level 20. I had no right to be level 20 to beat that game, but I did, and a lot of that is because of the way that the junction system works. Once you figure it out and figure out how to do things, and also realize that the game is, what's the word for it? The enemies scale with you, then you realize, oh, I need to take advantage of what the system is. If the enemies didn't scale with you and it was more of like traditional style where like you get to level 99 and just steamroll everything, then the game would be, I think people would just forget about 8. But because 8 does something unique and it tries to change some of the formula, and whether or not it does a good job or not is beside the point, it does something unique. People remember it. A lot of people have a distaste for it, and that's fine. I understand that. But it does something unique, and for that I give it a lot of credit. That being said, the characters suck, the story's confusing as shit, but it looks great. It looks really good, and it has one of the best soundtracks in the franchise, without a doubt. At least I think so. But yeah, I hold 8 in very high regards, and it is probably my 3rd favorite Final Fantasy. It is also one of the only games that one of the only RPGs that I've ever like 100%ed. I don't think I beat the Super Boss. Oh, no, I have beaten the Super Boss. So yeah, I've done everything in the game. On my initial playthrough, I hit everybody at level 99. I got ultimate weapons for everybody. We're changing that. I don't like these vocal tracks. We get everybody at... I got everybody at level 99. I got all their ultimate weapons in the original one. And I had a hard-ass time trying to beat Ultimecia because I know she scaled with me. I didn't understand that at 16. But it's still such a good game. And I think people shit on it for reasons that are valid, but I think they go a little overboard. Much like I think most people go overboard with their distaste for certain things. It's like, yeah, you can just tamp it down. You're fine. But yeah, no, love 8. 8's fantastic. Also, I love 9. I think 9's a good game. 9 is very much a return to form from what 8 did. And it goes back to more of like what 4, 5, and 6, and even 3 to a certain degree are like. It has one of the higher encounter rates in the PlayStation era, which is unfortunate. It looks really good, has a nice soundtrack. The characters are interesting, far more interesting than the characters in 8. A little more interesting than the characters in 7. I love the designs. It's like cross between chibi and just a really stylistic style to the game that works overall. Has a great overworld, interesting story. It has one of the worst final bosses in the franchise, in that I think, why does Necron exist? What is the point of that character? He just shows up. Like, you beat Kuja, and then it's like, I am Necron, I am the one that's going to kill you. And it's like, why, dude? Like, where did you come from? What's the point of you? And then you get into that fight, and it's just like, oh, this is just a fight. It's fine. And I played with the Moguri mod, which, if you have the game on PC, I would definitely recommend modding the hell out of it. This is an A-rank game for me, and I put it up here right next to 8. Okay. Here, I can put this here. On to 10. Oh boy. 10, his first game to have fully voiced characters. 10's presentation is one of the best in the series. 10 is the first game to be on PlayStation 2. And much like 7 on new hardware, where it truly like fleshes out what the scope of a Final Fantasy can be, it does a great job of taking advantage of all that. I don't know if I like 10 at all. I've played through it 3 times now, and it's just the late game is one of the roughest in the franchise, without a doubt. Final Fantasy as a whole, I haven't talked about this much, but Final Fantasy as a whole, it kind of has like a problem with the final dungeon, in that the final dungeon is always way more encounters than need be, way tougher enemies than need be, and then you just get into like a fight right before the final boss, right before the final save point, that one-shots your whole team and you have to do the whole damn dungeon again. Doesn't make any damn sense why they gotta make that shit that hard. It could be just a little less difficult and a little less tuned to be like super punishing. Like, the dungeon leading up to the final boss is far more difficult than the final boss itself, which is kind of nice in its own way because, you know, you don't have to think too hard. With the exception of the final boss in 3 was really quite difficult. Final boss in 4 can be difficult. Zero Miss can be a pain in the ass. And X Death can be a prick and just destroy. I mean, I had my issues with X Death. A lot of it is you can't cast magic. Oh wait, no, that's Zero Miss. With Zero Miss, you can't do magic, which so much of the game is using magic. Can't use magic, can't use summons, or else he will just destroy you. So that like, I would almost argue Zero Miss is like the hardest final boss in the franchise, but that's not what I'm here to rank. I could rank, maybe. But yeah, 10's final boss, like the Braska's final Aeon, is difficult in its own way, with the way that the structure of the game works and how it shows you the order in which everybody attacks. It can be worse than it is, but yeah, I don't know. I've not enjoyed my time with 10 the last couple times I've played, and I'm going to put it below 1. I would put it in D tier, but I think that's doing a disservice to all the good things that it does. It has some, like, as a turn-based game, it does some of the best things that I think have been carried over and taken into other games. The turn order that it shows on screen and being able to manipulate that and actually plan out your attacks based on that is game-changing. It is a thing that more games could utilize, and it's part of what I think makes Octopath Traveler and even the Bravely Default series, as an offshoot of both of those, far more interesting to play, because the combat becomes more than just a turn-based game. It's now there's actually strategy involved in how you manipulate the turn order. And it started with 10. And I think there's other games that did it before 10, but 10, Final Fantasy being as popular in the video game, pop culture zeitgeist, it makes more sense that it would be the real formulation of that going forward in the genre. So that's pretty good. I really like the ability to swap characters in and out at will. I think that allows for much more strategic elements going into the combat, and the combat in 10 is great. It does have its downsides, where you find yourself repeating the same steps over and over and over again, in order to get people to level appropriately. The lack of a leveling system outside of the sphere grid, I didn't really care for. It's interesting, but I like levels. I like numbers go up, which is, I mean, part of it goes against my liking of 2, but I like numbers go up. And with the sphere grid, you can kind of customize how your characters are, but it's not as, I think the presentation of the grid kind of hampers some of the exploration that you can do with characters, just because you have to go in a particular order in order to unlock everything, and it's not just like choose. Still a good game, and I mean 10 is a good place to start as well. I just hold it in kind of negative regards because it is what it is. I fell off. The first time through was great. The second time through was fine. The third and fourth time through, I don't need to play it ever again, and I hopefully will not. That being said, 10-2, I'll put that above Final Fantasy 1. That's a C tier game as well. 10-2 is neat. I think the thing's holding 10-2 back from being like a really good game. The story is kind of dumb and in a way that's like really uninteresting. There's some interesting stuff happening with it. It's Final Fantasy at its goofiest, in all honesty, and I give it lots of props for that. But the overarching story and, you know, Yuna just wanting to get Tidus back, and I don't know, I don't think it works as well. The mission structure and layout is neat. It's much more akin to like Crisis Core, which I think both of these a couple years apart, so that might be part of it. 10-2 would work really well on a handheld in short play bursts because of the way that the structure of the game is. The sphere grid system I think is interesting and neat, and the active turn-based battle system that it has I think works really well for what it is. But overall, it's kind of why it doesn't need to exist. I don't quite understand why it exists, but I was happy to play it. It's a fine game, but it is definitely a C tier game within the franchise. Then we have Final Fantasy 11, which isn't on this list because it's an MMO. It doesn't matter. It didn't play, doesn't matter. We're gonna throw that right there. Next is Final Fantasy 12. This is the International Zodiac Age Edition, or the International Zodiac Leveling. I don't know. This is what the Zodiac Age game that I played is based on. The International Edition, which allows it takes like the original Japanese release and I think mixes in some of the Western editions they did. I think they took down the difficulty a little bit in some regards, and they changed the way that some stuff works and how you can obtain certain things. Like in the original game, if you open like a particular chest in a particular way, you completely negate the ability to get a specific item. I think the Zodiac Spear, which is one of the best weapons in the game. Like you can't get it if you do certain things in certain orders. And for the Zodiac Age Edition and this International Edition, they changed some of that so that it wasn't as missable. 12 is a game that it has one of the most interesting stories, one of the most grounded stories in the franchise. It has wonderful characters. It's truly great characters. I like Vaughn is like the only one that's like but like Pinello's great, Balthier's great, Fran is great. Who else we got? Ronsenberg. Oh, why can't I remember his first name? Anyway, he's fantastic. Princess is great. Like, it's such a great cast of characters and such an interesting story with like it helps that it's a part of the Final Fantasy Tactics universe. It's the prequel to Final Fantasy Tactics in a lot of ways. That I think helps it because it's the same creators, and Tactics has like one of the better stories. I'll probably rank that one next. Man, Final Fantasy 12 is such a delight to play. Combat system is good once you get the hang of it, but it has a steep learning curve, especially with how the if-thens work. But it's an interesting like concept. And honestly, playing this in not fast forward mode would drive me absolutely nuts. The game is a little slow. So play the Zodiac Age Edition if you decide to play 12. But I'm going to throw 12 up here. I think 12 is among the best in the franchise. By a long shot. 12 is wonderful. Good soundtrack, interesting characters, interesting world, fantastic story. I'm going to rank Tactics. Now, I've not beaten Tactics. I've played like a handful of hours. I've watched a lot of people play through it. I don't really know the story, but I know there's a lot of twists and turns, and I know it's very politically driven. And I'm a big fan of anime politically driven stuff. That's why I like Gundam. There's just some interesting stuff going on there. I can't say much about Tactics other than its job system's really cool, and it does a good job of like giving you the ability to kind of flesh out characters and make them what you want, which is a very fun thing that you don't see from a lot of games. You see it more in the tactics sphere than you do in like the traditional JRPG sphere, but you get the idea. It has a wonderful soundtrack. I think the sprite work is really good. The encounter design, from what I've seen, is also pretty good. It can lock you behind some like stupid shit in terms of like you have to fight 2 battles back to back, and if you make it to the first one but get to the second one and aren't faring too well, if you save in between and don't create a new save file, you're kind of screwed. But that's from like PlayStation design more than anything. I would put tactics in the I'm gonna put tactics in the A tier. But it's gonna be back here with Final Fantasy VII Remake, where I can't really rank them because, like, I mean, I could put 7 Remake somewhere up here, but I'm not going to. I don't really want to rank these. I think they are A tier. I'm gonna put them in the back of A tier just because they're good games for what they are. But in terms of the conversation I'm having, mainly with myself here about ranking all this shit, they don't matter. They could both go here, but they're not. It's not what they are. In fact, I could just make a new one that's like, these games are great, but they don't. Nope. They're just going to be at the back of the A tier. It's fine. All right, so 12's done. On to 13. A very divisive game. 13, and I'll rank all 3 of these. I think 13 gets a bad rap because at the time it came out, people kind of like dismissed it because it wasn't quite the same. I mean, it wasn't what 12 was. 12 got a lot of praise for being unique in its own regard. I think 13 gets shit on for a lot. 13's seen a resurgence in positivity because the people that had 13 as their first game, Jesus Christ, they were children in 2009. Makes me feel even older than I really am. They grew up with it and they have a lot of positive things to say about 13 because it was their first one. And I get that. That's fine. And again, nostalgia goggles are on there for any of these for many people, and I'm not going to begrudge anybody for having certain games in higher regard than others. But 13 is a game I shat on for a lot because I thought they fucked up. They missed the opportunity to make a good turn-based game. And instead we got what many would call the corridor Final Fantasy. 10 does the same shit, and people love it. 13 just did it differently. 13's real big issue, too many proper nouns, and none of it is explained until like hours into the game. The combat system is a little confusing at first, and they don't really do a great job of explaining it. But once you kind of get into the weeds of it, I think 13's combat system is far better than it has any right to be. I really like 13. And A tier is like way overblown, but I don't want to. This is an A tier game for me. I think 13 can sit right up here with 4. The story is interesting enough, but like I said, there's too many proper nouns and it gets really confusing. But the presentation of it works really well. Some of the characters kind of suck. Hope has redeeming qualities later on. Snow is just a big dumb himbo. Lightning is cool as shit. I like Lightning as a protagonist. I think she's fantastic. Vanille and Fang are fun for what they are. It's nice to have, like, you know, the lesbian couple be the ones that are the true saviors. And then there's Saz, who's like kind of forgotten, but like cool. I like that he's got a little chocobo in his head. And he's got 2 guns. He's also one of the better characters in combat. So a lot of praise for 13. I really like 13. It's a hard one to kind of like get into, especially compared to the rest of these games here. But yeah, 13's really good. 13.2 I think is an improvement on the things that 13 does. It suffers from some of its overall design and its steep difficulty spike towards the end of the game. 13.2 is a game where if you don't do all the bonus content, all the side quests and side missions and all that kind of shit, it really punishes you because the end of the game is so difficult. I'm gonna throw this in the B tier. I'm gonna throw this in B tier. I'm gonna put it after 3 though. I like 13.2, and overall, I think 13.2 might be a better game than 13.1 in terms of its combat structure and the way that it tells its story. But like Noel, I don't really like. I think he's kind of dumb. Sarah's fine, but she's not as cool as Lightning. And the fact that it's only really like 2 characters that you play as throughout the entire thing kind of a bummer. But it's an improvement on the combat system. It has like an interesting like Chrono Trigger style time warp type thing that's going on that's pretty cool. But yeah, no, it's a fine game, and it's an interesting continuation of what 13 is. It, much like 10.2, doesn't really need to exist. 13's story comes to a nice conclusion, and 13.2 just kind of is like, well, what if we kept with those characters? And that's fine, I guess, but I don't know. Which leads me to Lightning Returns, which I'm gonna put in the C tier. I don't know why this game exists. This game only exists as a means to finish up the story that is set in place for 13.2. And honestly, you could just take the story that's in here and make a DLC for 13.2 and put it in the back half or something like that. The combat system is interesting, but kind of fails in being interesting to play. It's interesting as a novelty, but it doesn't feel good to do. Lightning, cool ass character. It's one of the main redeeming qualities of the game is Lightning is just cool. 16's not on here. Hold on, I gotta upload this. Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah, Lightning Returns doesn't need to exist. I don't know why it does, other than being a continuation of 13.2's story. And unfortunately, I think it hurts the 13 story, like the whole saga of Lightning overall, because it's just meh. Maybe if I'd played it at a different time, I might enjoy it more. Maybe I'll get back to it at some point and actually like try and figure it out. But I don't know. It just didn't seem all that interesting, and I don't really think it's worth playing, to be honest. And then there's 14, a game I have no interest in really playing. Well, I mean, I have really light interest in playing. I'll probably never play it. But it's an MMO, and people seem to love it. So, more power to them. But that's not my type of thing. So we'll then move on to 15. 15's interesting. 15 is the real change from what Final Fantasy's always been known for, and that is turn-based, strategy-based combat to being an action RPG in the true sense of being an action RPG. It is a one-button action RPG in a group of 4 characters that is fun to play. But if you're not doing a bunch of the extra stuff, it really kind of wears thin. My first playthrough of the game was like 60 something hours, 70-ish. And I did a lot. I did most of the side content as much as I felt was necessary. I did a handful of things in the post game. And overall, like I really enjoyed my time with 15 on my first playthrough. On the playthrough for this, a lot of the negatives of the franchise or of the series, not even the franchise or series, of the game were brought to light just because Final Fantasy 15 is a game that was marred in development hell for a very long time. It started off as 13 verses, became something else, and then eventually became 15. And it suffers because there's a lot that's not complete with the game. There's a lot that seems interesting, and you can tell they kind of rushed the end of it. The game, I think, is hurt a lot because of it, in a way that I don't think is really fair to the game itself, because it did really well. It's a game that sold really well. It's a game that kind of brought Final Fantasy back into a lot of people's minds as like a single player experience. The DLC I think helps flesh out the story of the game in ways that is good. But also, why couldn't that have just been in the game to begin with? To be honest. All except for Gladiolus's. Gladiolus's DLC fucking sucked. Everybody else's was fine. I really liked Arden's story. I liked knowing more about Arden as a character. He's a fine villain, but just based on the way that the main story plays out in the base game, he as a villain doesn't really feel like a villain so much as he's just the bad guy. If that makes any sense. Until you get like to the end and then it's like, oh no, he's actually, I get it. But it takes a minute, and he's still not as threatening or ominous as some of the other bad guys in the rest of the franchise. But no, 15's fun. 15's hard to rank. Because I think it's better than 13 too. I think it's better than 3. And I think it's better than Crisis Core. I would argue that it's better, not even argue, I would agree mostly that it's better than 2, but I don't hold it in as high a regard as 2. I'm going to put 15 here. And there's another reason for it, for why I would put it here. Like I said, 15 when it came out kind of brought Final Fantasy as a single player experience back into the minds of a lot of players, myself included. I had forgotten how much I enjoyed Final Fantasy as a series, as a franchise, before I played 15. Like I've always loved 6. Final Fantasy 6 is among my 5 favorite games of all time, and it will remain there. And I have a very fond, I have a fondness for it as a whole. But like the rest of these games, I also love in like a way that like Final Fantasy is my favorite franchise. And I've only come to realize this post playing Final Fantasy 15. And it's not because 15 really made me go, man, I love this game, I love this franchise. No, it just kind of reminded me how much I liked Final Fantasy and made me rethink how I play these games and how I think about them as a whole. And because of that, I hold it in a high regard. It's still low on the totem pole in terms of like overall goodness, but like there's a thing that it did in my brain that made me able to do all of this and like do all of this and continue to play and stream games. Like, 15 came out right before I started getting into streaming, like not full time, but like on a regular basis. While I may not be a successful streamer and I may not be a successful content creator in any regard, I'm not, I still enjoy doing it. And a lot of that comes from the mentality I had coming out of 15. And so I'll always kind of hold it in high regard because of that. Which then leads us to Final Fantasy 16. And you're looking over here and you may be like, well, what about the Xenogears? We'll get... This brings me to Final Fantasy 16. Released in 2023 in June? End of June, I think? I don't know, June or July, in the summer. It is the continuation of the shift from being a turn-based RPG into a full-blown action RPG in more ways than what 15 was. 15 was a one-button action RPG. You could actually relate that more to like Tales of or Star Ocean. But 15 is what if Devil May Cry were a role play? In many ways, simply because the Devil May Cry 5 combat director is the combat director of Final Fantasy 16. But it's also Yoshi P, which if you play Final Fantasy 14 or know anything about it, he's the one that brought it back from the brink of destroying Square as a company to being one of the reasons Square still exists as a company, even in their golden years, their post-golden years. I don't know, apparently Square's not been doing all that great, but you know what? 14 keeps them alive. Mad respect for that. But 16's his baby, in a way. 16, I wasn't sure what I was going to think of it when I played it. Because 16 is a game that is so different from everything else that came before. But it is still Final Fantasy. and it's still Final Fantasy in ways that I would not have expected. I came away from it really liking it. I think 16 is a very good game, and when it comes out on PC, I hope that more people play it and give it a shot, because it's definitely worth it. Combat's really satisfying. The story is compelling enough to keep you wanting to play it. I don't think it's anywhere near the best story in the franchise, not by a long shot, but it has some of the better characters. Clive is an interesting protagonist. I think he's a very good one. I'll actually get to ranking protagonists in a second, but I think Clive is a strong reason why 16 works the way that it does. Jill is really good as well. It has one of the best Sids in the entire series, which is saying something because there's a lot of good Sids in this franchise. His brother, it's interesting because like his brother's the type of character, and I can't remember his name at the moment. Forgive me. But Clive's brother is a type of character that has been in this franchise many times. The secondary protagonist, the other one, if you will. And usually those characters suck. Like, they are some of my least favorite. Hope. Trying to think who else is like a secondary protagonist, and there really isn't many others, but like, oh, I was gonna say Vivi, but Vivi is better than Zidane, so there's that. Like Zell and 8, like the secondary characters. Trying to think who else, where else we got. Yeah, Hope from 13. We got Zell and 8. 7 has Barrett. I think Barrett kind of sucks, to be honest. 12 has, I mean, Balthier is the protagonist. Vaughn's the secondary protagonist, so he's kind of like, Vaughn fits into there. And they're not great characters, but it works in 16. I think it works pretty well. 16, I think, kind of suffers from only really being able to control Clive, but in the type of combat system and the type of game that it is, that's like the only way you can do it. One of the things I like about Final Fantasy as a whole is I really like the cast of characters that you get and how you can interact with them and how you can like have them, how you can control them and kind of integrate them into your party and build your strategies around that. Whereas with 16, it was just, how do I make Clive more of a one-man decimation machine? And, you know, it worked for what it was. It has some of the best set pieces in the franchise, as it should, because it's on a new system that's much more powerful than everything else that came before. And 16 is a great video game. 16 goes in A tier. And I think I'm going to put 16 after 9. Yep. 16, I think, deserves to be here. It's a great game. It feels good to play. It plays well. It has... I think the story in it is good. It's less like Game of Thrones than it is just like an M-rated Final Fantasy game. It gets bonkers as hell towards the end, and I love it for that. More bonkers nonsense in a serious setting. And on top of all that, Ben Starr, the voice of Clive Rossdale, is a fantastic human being who seems to have a wonderful personality and wonderful sense of humor about him, and has a love for the franchise as a whole. And I think his involvement with the game and his kind of promotion of everything that goes along with it post the release of the game, I think elevates it in a way that you don't get with some of these other ones. So yeah, that's the Final Fantasy power rankings via me. That's my personal power rankings there. There is, however, one more game that needs to be ranked, and that is Xenogears. And as we all know, Xenogears is the best Final Fantasy. I will take no questions about that. There's no reason for me to explain myself. Xenogears is a flawed masterpiece, and everyone should play it regardless of how shitty it may be to play in 2024. Yeah, so there's that. And I will say this. Xenogears and Final Fantasy VI are both in my top 5 favorite games, like, of all time, but I can't organize them, so they just kind of sit here, and we can just assume that they take the same spot. But Xenogears is the best Final Fantasy. Do not argue with me. Final Fantasy is a treat. I love Final Fantasy. I think it's a wonderful franchise, and I'd like it if people would play it. You don't have to love it. I'd like it if people would play more and enjoy it and just have a good time with it. And there's a lot there that is interesting. It's not the greatest. In fact, a lot of what's happening in those games is bullshit and really stupid and not worth really getting too excited about. But if you can take it as what it is, you can have fun with it. And yeah, if you like anime, Final Fantasy is some anime-ass bullshit. Like, go for it. Have fun. Enjoy. Pick one. And it's going to be anime. Yeah, all of them are. But yeah. So that I'm going to stop prattling on and I'm going to end this. Thanks for joining me. Again, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for stopping by. If you repeatedly do so, Earlock and Dragoon, I see you here all the time and I appreciate it. I hope you'll stop by again in the future. Until next time, have a good rest of your year. Have a very Merry New Year. And I hope you'll stop by in the future. Farewell.